we live in really angering times. We've just seen that it's practically impossible to, forget getting ahead, just staying, keeping your head above water these days. So what's going on within the U.S. government? How are they responding to the fact that people are freaking out? Well, from CNN Politics headline, Justices Barrett and Sotomayor urge Americans to tone down political rhetoric despite charged atmosphere. Incredible. Yeah, we took your rights, but can you just calm the fuck down? No. End capitalism. Join an anti-capitalist organization today. Fight for anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist principles in your organizations. We need to end capitalism. We need to stop this system. So anyway, reading some of this article, 2 Supreme Court justices on Tuesday urged Americans to turn down the temperature of civic discourse, even as the High Court is working through some of the most charged political cases to land on its docket in years. Quote, "Why should any of us want to obliterate the opposition or even see another person as the opposition?" So this is what you're getting from, as the saying goes, if your rights depend on fewer than a dozen people who are political appointees appointed for life, and giving you that right, you don't really have that right. And here we get some bipartisanship, because you get the far-right religious crazy, and then the supposedly more, liberal progressive there agreeing on this. Why would you even see another person as the opposition? I don't know, because they're trying to take every last penny I have. I usually consider people like that enemies. Anyway, Justice Amy Coney Barrett told an audience in Washington, D.C. during an event focused on civic education. I mean, does this land with anyone is really my question. I don't know who at this point, if you're not literally on the Supreme Court or in Congress, does this land at all? Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that on the Supreme Court, she and her colleagues come to disagreements with an assumption that all 9 are operating in good faith. Really? Because if I was there, I would assume that they are part of a cult and are completely incapable of doing anything but just the most utterly bootlicking type of service to capital that is possible. So anyway, I think that the public discourse has lost some of that, Sotomayor lamented. There's a lot of personal attacks on people's character. The comments came as the Supreme Court has been wrestling with several high-profile political controversies, including a recent case challenging former President Donald Trump's eligibility to appear on Colorado's ballot and his claims of immunity from criminal prosecution. Neither justice mentioned those cases or any others in their remarks at George Washington University during the annual Civic Learning Week National Forum. Barrett, a Trump nominee, noted at one point that justices have the, quote, ability to write an opinion more broadly or more narrowly as one way to find compromise, and that not everything has to be decided in an opinion. Then they go on to talk about the Trump thing a little bit. I couldn't really care less, but here's a reminder from ProPublica that Justice Clarence Thomas had a child in private school, and then this right-wing crazy Harlan Crow paid the tuition. Crow paid for private school for a relative Thomas said that he was raising, quote, as a son. And, ethics lawyers say this is obviously way outside the norm. And so these people are just completely bought by the people who are screwing you, your family, your friends, out of everything that you own. And they're putting everything, all of your dreams, all of your future at risk. But they're telling you, be calm. Don't flip out. The system is working as intended. If the system is working as intended, then we need a new system. Meanwhile, speaking of the system, this is what's been going on in New York City. So, per the New York Times, the National Guard and state police will patrol the subways and check bags. So the governor said that amid a series of violent crimes in the subway, they would deploy 1,000 members of the state police and National Guard to the transit system. And then immediately afterwards, there was a domestic violence situation where a man threw his girlfriend onto the tracks. I think she lived. But strangely enough, they were not there to stop this thing from happening. Almost like it's more about, just intimidating people and reminding people that they are living under a brutal police state that is constantly watching them. And so from Dang Laser on Blue Sky, day 2 of Candy Crush Regionals, heating up there, how much do you think it costs for these, I don't know, 24 cops to be standing around looking at the floor? But this is what you can expect, more and more of this as the system gets worse, especially after the next economic crash, because they go toward the fascism when capitalism goes into crisis. That's essentially what fascism is. It's a class collaborationist, national unity type of thing that tries to get people to forget the class struggle. It'll use some quasi-socialist imagery sometimes, but its content is anti-socialist, counter-revolutionary, may, again, use the aesthetics of socialism here and there when it needs to as a strategy. But by and large, it's just there when capitalism needs to defend itself, and it thinks that it is entering a period of vulnerability. So expect more of this. It ramped up quite a bit after 2008. But again, they were already laying the groundwork for this with the war on terror even before that happened. And now they're all set. They gave themselves all the tools that they will need. So about the emerging police state, let's turn to an article. It's another one out of The Guardian, actually, from March 7. So headline, Socialism, Anti-Fascism, and Anti-Abortion on the Prevent list of terrorism warning signs. Communism is also among the ideologies on the document, as human rights groups say that the UK scheme has been politicized. A document from Prevent, the official scheme to stop radicalization, good luck with that, as your system collapses, includes believing in socialism, communism, anti-fascism. So when you are formally against anti-fascism, you are fascist. That's how that works. In a list of potential signs of ideologies leading to terrorism. Now, what do we actually see as far as the far left and the far right and terrorism? We see like way, many times more far right terrorism than you see, far left terrorism. There'll be maybe 20 cases of far right terrorism for every 1 case of left-wing terrorism. So, doing this and trying to put them up on the same footing, it's just not remotely the same. Because, again, remember that the purpose of right-wing politics generally is to defend capitalism in decline. And it's already a violent system, and they use the violence, as part of, that's just the way that it works. It's an extension of the state itself. The left wing, on the other hand, is much more concerned with building movements and building labor power and things like that. Left-wing terrorism is very infrequent, and it's usually, basically never tied to large organizations, at least, in countries like the UK where this is supposed to be, aimed at. But I guess they would include things like, quote, eco-terrorism or stuff like that in there. Anyway, let's continue. And I say that we've discussed terrorism a number of times on the channel. There's something from January that we did called On Terrorism by Bill Bland, and it discusses how this is not really a part of mass politics, and again, it's much more right-wing individualist thinking. But this comes as the conservative government considers widening what it will consider to be, quote, extremism. The document is part of Prevent awareness training for those covered by the duty to inform if they suspect radicalization. That includes teachers and youth workers. So keep that in mind when you're sharing things with teachers and youth workers, if you have to share anything with teachers and youth workers. In the U.S., we have something called mandated reporting, which generally covers more like child abuse. I'm not aware of anything in the U.S. of having to snitch on people for suspected radicalization, at least yet, so congrats UK, you're ahead of the US on that. But the guidance was updated last year and published with little or no fanfare after William Shawcross's controversial government-ordered report on Prevent was released. A former head of counterterrorism said that it risked damaging Prevent. You think that putting anti-fascism in your radicalization symptoms is damaging it? Yeah, it's just telling everyone that you are fascist again. So anyway, it said a human rights group said that the government was playing political games under the guise of stopping terrorism. In a section on the left wing, it states, quote, two broad ideologies, socialism and communism, each are united by a set of grievance narratives, okay, or that might actually have some reality to it, which underline their cause. Neat. In a section on single-issue ideologies, the document reads, quote, narratives are likely to come from those who seek to change a specific policy or practice, as opposed to replacing the whole economic, political, or social system. Examples include animal rights, anti-abortion, or anti-fascism. Talk about a major misunderstanding of anti-fascism. I mean, if capitalism was able to declare itself truly anti-fascist, you wouldn't have a problem. Capitalism cannot do that, though. Needs to keep fascism in its back pocket at all times to play that card as things heat up. So it also talks about, you know, Muslims who have been targeted since the 90s for this, and that is, you know, another kind of racism that is also tied to, you know, anti-colonial efforts going on in the Middle East and national liberation efforts. And we see in the genocide that Israel is waging in Gaza, across Europe, there have been people just waving a Palestinian flag at a protest who get targeted for that. So, you know, there's sort of the usual suspects here. Amnesty International, this is yet another crackdown from the UK government to stifle freedom of expression. And it's so it also says, the documents themselves say, it's not your responsibility to risk assess the level of radicalization, and urges providing as much context as possible before it's shared with the police. So they're basically just like, dump all the content into the system, we'll sort it out. Don't you try to judge whether, you know, whether it's dangerous or not. If you see any of these warning signs, just tell us everything that you have. We'll figure it out. You know, don't try to use your own judgment, basically. It also asks any referral to include details of the ideology of concern, providing details of the ideology which may be contributing to making the person susceptible to radicalization. This training is designed to make sure that when you share a concern that a person may be radicalized into terrorism, it's informed, it's with good intention, the response to that concern is considered and proportionate. So again, like I said, the actual terrorism, like in the US, is almost exclusively from the right wing, yet strangely nothing seems to be done about that, like the mass shootings, it's right wing, etc. Why don't they do anything about it? Because capitalism needs these people. As it goes into crisis, it must draw on increased amounts of irregular police-type forces to cow the population and to you know, keep things running business as usual. And they'll use as much terror as they need to try to hang on to that. All right, so last article before we get into the chat, and this actually ties in Israel. So there is, I can't read this whole article because it's extremely long, but this is from 2016, and this is inside GILEE, or I don't know if that's GILEE or how they pronounce that. It's the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. I'll say GILEE. The U.S.-Israel Law Enforcement Training Program seeking to redefine terrorism. Huh. So a lot of people noted that what was going on in the war on terror seemed to have very close parallels to what was going on in Israel as far as some of the policies that the U.S. was adopting, and this whole narrative of, you know, counterterrorism and anti-terrorism being used to justify all kinds of atrocities. And yeah, it turns out that Israel is actually very closely involved inside the U.S. in training law enforcement to do, you know, what is called anti-terrorism. However, those tactics, those systems can easily be turned for any other purpose, you know, quote, terrorism or not. So the recent wave of heightened Islamophobia in the U.S. is not limited to the violent rhetoric and cruel policies of conservative politicians. It's also being drummed into police through a Georgia-based program that has sent thousands of American law enforcement officials to Israel for counterterrorism training. In an unusually candid discussion about the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, Program director Robert Friedman recently declared that, quote, "There is no Islamophobia." Patently false on its face. There is knife-ophobia, as he presented decontextualized video clips of Palestinians stabbing Israeli police officers. Gee, I wonder, is there any context to the conflict between Palestine and Israel? Would it involve colonialism? Would it involve land theft? Would it involve illegal settlements, etc.? No, it's just, Muslims love knives. End of story. Thank you so much, Israel, for explaining that. Friedman's audience was not his usual group of high-ranking police, military, and government officials. Rather, he was speaking to a small number of civilians at a December 7th, 2015 luncheon held by the Atlanta chapter of the American Jewish Committee. The talk, titled "How Safe is America from ISIS?" offered a glimpse into the racist ideology underpinning the trainings that police nationwide have undergone. So then there's a section here on Robert Friedman's Zionist advocacy. Friedman emigrated from Romania to Israel in 1950, then came to the U.S. in the 1970s to study sociology, and found his niche in researching community policing as a professor of criminology. I love sociology. I think of criminology as judgmental sociology. Basically, it's like if you take sociology, then build in lots of bourgeois norms about what is deviant and what is to be punished, boom, you got criminology. All right. He founded GILEE that can't be the way you pronounce it, but I don't know how to pronounce it, in 1992, initially to train local law enforcement in Israeli counterterrorism tactics that he believed were necessary to ensure security for the 1996 Olympics. The program has grown by leaps and bounds and now serves as a foreign exchange program for U.S. and Israeli police. In multiple delegations throughout the year, law enforcement officials from the U.S. travel to Israel for counterterrorism training, and Israeli police come to Georgia to learn about community policing and drug interdiction. According to Friedman's AIC presentation, AJC, sorry, text is small. 24,000 participants have engaged in 330 programs and 180 delegations during GILEE's 23-year life. So he also served on the International Association of Chiefs of Police and the Georgia Security Council, and he got GSU, Georgia State University, awarded him an endowed chair worth $1 million, which was created specifically to support this program. All right, so then, amazingly, the Georgia General Assembly passed 2 resolutions commending the program, and the governor hosted the 20-year anniversary in the governor's mansion. So this is not some, out-of-the-way, under-the-radar program. It is celebrated at the highest levels of the Georgia state government. The heraldry is surprising even in a state like Georgia, given how blatantly Friedman's ideology hews to the extreme, which I find is pretty typical of people that close to Israel. The GILEE website features Stand With Us propaganda, articles by Alan Dershowitz, along with some penned by Friedman, who blasts Hamas for alleged war crimes while mentioning nothing of Israel's innumerable breaches of international law, and a bizarre tract on the importance of including Holocaust education in police training. Now, of course, we don't want people to forget the Holocaust. That is a bit of a strange place to put it. So there was public scrutiny of the program for a while, but then over the past year, this was 2015-16, as the movement for Black Lives has forced the problem of police brutality into the national spotlight, journalists and activists have questioned how programs like this serve to militarize U.S. law enforcement. Like I said, this kind of stuff goes back to the Bush-Cheney years, especially because all this militarization of U.S. police, that was a lot of what was going on under the War on Terror funding. Some of it was going into, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere, but there were also counterterrorism budgets going to like random places in the Midwest that didn't really have, much of a problem with terrorism, but suddenly they are basically militarized outfits. And so this is a process. The U.S. always does these under the guise of the war on. It'll increase its militarization, whether it's the war on drugs. Saw a lot of militarization of police through that. And then the war on terror. It's not just something that's happening overseas. So anyway, I will leave the article here as it is quite long, but there is an explicit tie-in of one branch of the militarization and the more than just militarization in terms of the equipment, and to some extent that speaks to the mindset, but also just the fanatical outlook that is being taught to police, many of whom are former military. So they learn all of these brutal tactics abroad, then they bring them back to the U.S. and start using them here, and Israel is helping with that process. So like we just covered in the last stream on Monday, that Israel has been airing torture of Palestinian prisoners on TV. So I mean, these really the kind of people that you want. That's what their system is doing. Do you want to transport that system over here? Because that's definitely what is coming. And Israel needs to be stopped. It is to a large extent just an extension and a tool of U.S., UK, general the big imperialists. It is reaching levels that are extremely escalated, let's say.